Hello, welcome back and to Make It Conscious and to this series on the future of work. So this episode is really, in some ways, the heart of this whole series because I want to get very down to what's happening right now. What can we actually see? What is the current trajectory of the nature of work as we know it? In the previous episode, I talked about the lead up to the working world right now, the current crisis, quiet quitting, people leaving, employers struggling to find people, the fact that AI and tech in general is coming in to make such an impact. And so I'm building on that now. I'm going to talk about where this leads over the next several years, really within the next 10 years. So these are things that are not yet fully realized, but nonetheless pretty demonstrable. These are current trends that you can extrapolate. So there's nothing too speculative here. This is all pretty accepted stuff. Now, if you're familiar with my content, you'll know that I often come at these things from a more psychological background, maybe even a psycho-spiritual background, if you like. I do a lot of work with the unconscious mind. My brand, Make It Conscious, is really about helping people to find freedom through coaching and through resources and training. And so that's a key feature of my work, and that's the perspective I come at this from. But let's not negate like the really obvious stuff that's kind of the talk of the town right now. What's actually happening in the working world and where is it going? How are you going to see this unfold in your own life and work over the next decade? So that's what today's episode is all about. And so to that end, I want to go to a quote by Pat Tomlinson, who is the current CEO of Mercer. And he said this on the Future Ready Leadership podcast. So this is Jacob Morgan's podcast. So this is an abbreviated quote. He said, once you find the right people, they're going to have to develop with you as an organization. The concept that there will always be this unending supply of talent out there will start to get more challenged. There's a lot of fear around technology replacing employees. It's more likely that it's going to be integrated with work than replacing work. Work will look very different. So, as I said, I've cut and spliced this and abridged it quite significantly. But if you go to that podcast episode, you'll find the full quote. And there's a couple of key points here. Let's go to the second one, right? Because he's talking about the fear around technology replacing employees. This might well be the whole heart of this whole conversation. Is that what's really happening here? In his view, it's more likely it won't be like that. It's not going to replace employees, at least not on some grand scale in the way that many folks fear, but actually that it's going to be integrated with them. Now, others have disagreed. Others in equally senior roles have said that, for example, like all graduate roles are probably going to go to AI. And okay, the flip side of that might be that young people, as they arguably should, will be becoming much more self-reliant, or forced to at least pull themselves up by their bootstraps, or become, well, underutilized and purposeless, which is a terrible place to be. And I think the pain of purposelessness is often what compels people to really become very self-reliant. That was certainly the case for me many years ago. We often have to confront this level of pain to actually be compelled to make a change. It's often how it works. This is something to be embraced. That's my take on it, with many important caveats, which I'm going to be discussing in this episode. But another point he makes here is about finding the right people and developing them with the organization. This is something I'm going to be talking more about later, but just to touch on it briefly now, development means more than training. It means more than just giving them the skills to do their job. It means a deeper alignment between the person and the organization. So if the organization is not doing genuinely helpful things in the world, that's going to lead to contradiction eventually. It's going to fall apart. And the only people who are going to want to work for you are going to be those that are aligned values-wise, at least on a long-term sustainable basis. In other words, when I hear development, I think self-knowledge. I think shadow work. I think organizational shadow work. There's an idea. How about that? That might be idealistic, but at some point that's going to be not only merely a growing trend, but the question. Because there's nothing about an organization in itself that means It has to be immoral. That means it has to drag its employees into a power dynamic. An organization is simply a group of people coming together to achieve a common aim. Now, even your own aims have probably changed recently and are always changing. But there's also alignment between you and your friends, you and your family, you and your partner, and hopefully some degree of alignment between you and your clients or your employer. Otherwise, you're going to have a very rough time of it and it's not going to last. But that need for alignment is going to become ever more important. It's always important, but it's going to reach a place where you simply cannot hide behind it anymore. You cannot claim that it's otherwise. Just as a side note here, I mentioned Terry McKinnell in the previous episode, who has done excellent work in the field of macro astrology. And so he makes the case that organizations generally are associated with Pisces, the sign of Pisces. Now, I've said you don't have to believe, as it were, in some kind of magical force going on here, but simply use astrology as a kind of symbolic analog to what's going on. If you just leave it at that as a way to think about things, that's very useful, no matter what your stance is on anything else you might consider esoteric. So that said, let's move on. What are these, or rather, what is the AI and tech catalyst doing in our world? Well, it's forcing the fundamental question: what am I uniquely here to contribute? Because many of the things that humans find boring or draining, tiring, unproductive, or even unconducive to learning and development, tech can help with all of those. Even things like learning or reading can happen kind of faster because you can ask AI to summarize things for you. Say it's a set of terms and conditions, something that's not designed for artistic purposes or inciting some kind of feeling in you, but purely for informational purposes. Like, AI is incredibly useful in that regard. Just this morning, I had to translate a document, 14-page terms and conditions document in another language, and it would have been hopeless for me to try and understand it on my own, even with the help of Google Translate, probably. Just threw it into an LLM and it just told me. It told me straight away what I needed to know. You can do this with any new form that you sign or anything. So tech is taking away a lot of the menial tasks that humans have been doing for a very long time. And so that actually, if used well, frees up capacity, time, focus, energy, and resources for meaningful work, including consciousness development. So including the progression of freedom. Harking back to the Hegel quote from the previous episode, the history of the world is the progression of the consciousness of freedom. And your history, done well, is the progression of your own consciousness of your innate freedom. So even though technology is scary to a lot of folks, understandably so, because it has an almighty dark side, and it can be used for just a more elaborate avoidance of this process, and it will be used. So the idea here is to make good use of it. Be conscious of how you're using it. And that is whether you want to discover your authentic value through the use of tech and AI, to outsource those machine tasks that arguably you as a human should probably never have been doing, and outsource those to AI. And if you don't, you're going to become increasingly replaceable. Because if you insist on, like the candlelight cloth makers of the pre-industrial revolution, you're going to be pushed aside by something else. It doesn't mean that what you're doing can't be done to a higher human standard with greater feeling. But there'll be many things where that just isn't needed by the market. That might sound sad, but I think that's actually a misdirection, because what that means is that you can actually utilize your freedom more effectively to be more human. So AI is obviously just completely changing the world of work. And as Pat Tomlinson just said, it's going to be integrated into the workplace, and organizations that don't use it are going to very quickly fall behind. In fact, the way and the extent to which they use AI is going to be, for the next 10 years at least, what determines their market competitiveness to a large degree. Now, I think that that's just part of the story, and that there's also a conversation around alignment and shadow work. And Tomlinson himself is also saying something a bit like that. he's not thinking about it in those terms, but that's what I hear when I hear that. It's that people are going to have to develop in every possible way, and in whatever way that means. So what can AI actually do? What can you actually do with it? Well, perhaps the most immediate use is to process and synthesize information at a massive scale. Very useful if you want to summarize a document, you want to learn things more quickly. Say you're reading a book, you can plug a book into an AI and help understand the book better. Say if it's a difficult text, technical text, philosophical text. Clearly generating content is a big part of this. But this is one of the more controversial areas of AI, because content is something that still relies on human ingenuity and always will. So whether it's imagery, you'll see that a lot of my imagery is AI generated. Not as easy as it might look actually to get a good image from AI, but admittedly that's AI generated imagery often leaves something out. Now, you're still transmitting something into that when you give it an instruction or a prompt, and also in the choice of imagery too, I would say, because if you've got 100 images to choose from and you choose the one that really captures what you're trying to say, that's still a degree of human input, I would argue, but it's not completely human. There's still something being replaced there. So artists will never truly be replaced by AI. That's a contradiction, because AI cannot create the kind of art that relies on that genuine interface with unconscious content. It can maybe extrapolate from certain trends, albeit not very well, certainly at this time. But it can't sense in the way that a human can. It doesn't have an intuition. And that is what makes it artificial. That's what makes it different from a mind. So arguably the very name artificial intelligence is a bit of an oxymoron, because if it was artificial, it's not truly intelligent, depending on what we mean by intelligence. So generating content, yeah, great for coding. If you're already a pretty proficient coder, then AI can help you in a massive way. And actually now there's a lot of AIs that can do coding for you, even if you don't understand any programming language. Vibe coding is going to become more and more of a thing. So just telling the AI what you want in a website or an app, and it will just build it for you. You're going to have to tweak it a few times, no doubt, but it's only going to get better and better. However, this is one of the danger areas as well, because there's a temptation to use AI just to produce creative content. Using AI to do things that really a human should still be doing, and that is to generate honest and artistic creations. Or using AI to present an idea or an image or video and not being upfront about the fact that it's AI generated. Not only is that dishonest, it's also dangerous. And we've seen that. I mean, there was the video of Elon Musk and Georgia Maloney kissing some time ago, and many people believed it was real. But at some point, there's probably going to be a need to verify and validate AI generated content, maybe using blockchain technology or something to prove its authenticity, or disprove if it's AI generated. Automating workflows, this is now coming on the scene in quite a big way, whether that's scheduling, quality control, resource planning. I've also listed here customer service, but there's a question mark around that too. Because if it's AI, is it really service? That's one thing to bear in mind. Sometimes you just want to solve a problem, you're dealing with a seller, and you just want to chat with a machine and get a quick response. You don't necessarily want to call up your phone company, be on hold for 5 minutes, and then have a small talk with the person on the other end of the phone. But sometimes you do need that, or sometimes you do need a human to be involved. AI is going to make all that a lot more streamlined, hopefully. However, there's also a lot of organizations who are using this in a very dishonest and destructive way, perhaps by using AI to posture as a real person when it's not, or to even try and discourage you from actually entering a support inquiry. This is something we're seeing more and more with big process heavy conglomerates or organizations that are either very just big or that buy out other companies and then try to streamline things. And one of the darkest patterns I've seen so far is not only bad customer service, but I suppose what might be called anti-customer service. And it's one of the most insidious and dishonest practices I've seen in organizations. Not naming any names, but basically what it means is customer service that's designed to make you go away whilst pretending to be helpful. So it's actually worse than not having customer service at all. And in fact, having a contact link or a chat window serves no other purpose to you as the customer other than to make you think that the person you're dealing with is actually trying to help you. That the entity you're buying from or engaging with is actually trying to serve you. They're doing it to save face. When in truth, they either don't have the resources or they don't want to pay for those resources. So they hire unequipped people, they don't train them properly, they pay them next to nothing, and they get them to just copy stock texts, basically to make you just not bother. And this is a really shameless and unscrupulous way to try and improve the bottom line. And it's a prime example of what happens when you just focus on a metric and you forget all the intangible things that really matter. I talked about that kind of thing in the episodes on the post-moral scammer. So that's another example of that kind of trope that we're seeing in modern business. However, otherwise, AI can be very useful for automating workflows. And these are things that most people in the right mind probably shouldn't be doing for very long, not for any significant chunk of their lives. Take what you need to learn from it, great, move on. But beyond the point, if you're just executing on a process, there are many things coming that are going to do that a lot better than you can. So it makes sense to really double down on what it is that makes you uniquely human. Outsource the machine tasks to the machines. So we're also going to be seeing AI agents coming on board. So over the last 3 years, the main talk of the town has been LLMs. It's ChatGPT, it's Claude, it's Gemini, it's Grok. Have a chat, type something in, it can now search the internet. It's pretty good at that. It's getting better. But it can't act for you. And it also has limited ability to sort of span multiple applications. AI agents are going to take that to the next level, and they already are. So an AI agent can actually act for you. You can tell it what to do, and it will go and do that. It will pay for things with your card details. So there's obviously a lot of natural concerns about this, and it will go wrong. No doubt it has to, just like everything does at some point. But that doesn't mean it's not going to, on balance, work and produce some kind of improvement. It might work well 99.9% of the time, and to all intents be welcomed in eventually by most people. And it might again be a case of, if you're not using this, then your business might fall behind. Now, in a future episode, we're also going to be looking at where this is going ideally. What does a conscious organization look like? Well, ideally, it's one that doesn't have to compete in any significant way. It doesn't have to try and take from anyone else or step on anyone else's toes. Now, competition keeps you sharp to a point, but beyond the point, competition only occurs where you're not being yourself. And that also applies at the organizational level too, in principle. Because no one can compete with you, right? In being you. You are the only person who can do that. So what competition does is it actually compels you to differentiate. It compels you to bring on board what is uniquely you. Differentiation, this is a key part of any business strategy. But one way in which a lot of organizations naturally try to handle competition is not to differentiate, but to stamp out. It's to dominate. It's to try and do the same thing faster, cheaper, whatever it might be. And some of that is not true differentiation. It's not a creative exercise. It's actually a destructive exercise. So the idea here being that eventually the inherently creative aspect of organizations will have to come more and more into the forefront. It will no longer be enough just to repeat the patterns of the industrial era, which are now being still carried through, but that is the idea of sort of just meeting specification and doing things faster, cheaper, so on. It's not inherently creative beyond the point. So AI agents will form a part of that. Again, it's just going to take what there is already and to the next level. And that's certainly conducive to creativity. It's not purely a competitive thing, but if you're not doing it, if you're not using them as an individual or as an organization, that could create some challenges. And lastly, we're going to see seamless integration of AI across tools and systems. So across different apps, across different networks, across different organizations perhaps. And you might also have a personal AI. And so where I think this gets really interesting is how different people will have different AIs, right? So there might be a case for basing that on your personality type preferences, because different personality types have different human value to offer, generally speaking, and also different blind spots. So you can use AI to facilitate what it is you have to offer as a human, but also to compensate for some of your blind spots, at least some of the more machine-based ones. Again, an AI can never fully replace you as a human unless you're refusing to be a human yourself, and then naturally it's going to. So, lots of changes afoot there. Again, this is just the next 10 years, but you can imagine how this would all unfold going forward, and how when these things align and integrate, so you've got an AI agent that's working across all systems and is generating specification texts, leaving the creative stuff to you, summarizing things for you, alerting you to things as they come up. It's going to be incredibly useful. And where it gets interesting is where that actually then facilitates your own self-knowledge journey, because you don't have to do the things that were an ineffective or inefficient use of your time, your energy, your mental capacity. You can allow yourself to focus on what is truly aligned with you as a human being. So, what does that consist of? Well, here's a few ideas. The human role in work is about, firstly, leadership and influence. And I don't only mean leadership of other people here. That's a key part of it. But it's really something that's inherently creative and directed. Technology cannot be directed in itself. It can only be directed towards what a human being has directed it towards. It doesn't have self-determination in itself. It may sometimes have the appearance of that, but that's just what it's doing based on what it's been programmed to do. It doesn't have the innate self-determination that a human being has, that a mind has. Whether it will, I lean towards no, but I'm open to other perspectives on that, of course. And so that means creating the future, whatever that means. That is a uniquely human role. And that does mean leading other people as well, recruiting them to the cause, the vision, whatever it might be. Influencing. Maybe it's through charisma, maybe it's through logical argument, providing hope and providing genuine care. AI can't do any of that, just as it can't genuinely build relationships. We're starting to see some pretty high-profile cases now of people losing their minds to AI. It might produce the impression or experience of relationship, but it's not true relationship. And so just as people had to understand the health effects of other things like smoking, and now, of course, screen time, social media, being glued to your phones, quite clearly, there's a caution that is needed in regards to the use of AI here. Not getting sucked into it and not projecting or transferring onto it. Maintaining human relationships at all costs. That's what's really important here. And certainly, I mean, this really sinister stuff around like AI girlfriends and things. Funny enough, I don't know if AI boyfriends are a thing or anywhere near the same degree. That is a very, very bad idea. It's not a healthy replacement for anything. It's simply a semblance that completely destroys and detracts from the real thing. So, third bullet point here is self-knowledge, which is everything, right? It's the whole journey is about self-knowledge. The unfolding of the consciousness of freedom itself, awareness, insight, and coming to arrive at one's own unique and specific value. This is something that AI simply can't do, but it can support you in doing it if you use it well. This is the job of the human being, including shadow work. What is shadow work? Well, from one perspective, it is the path of conscious suffering. It is suffering deliberately, not because you like suffering, but because suffering leads to genuine growth and transformation. Again, completely not the remit of technology. This is a human job. And that involves a dialectical engagement with yourself, with the unconscious. That means dancing with uncertainty and paradox. A machine might be able to describe both sides of a paradox. It might be able to give you stock answers to paradoxes that have been answered before. But what it can't do is meaningfully engage in a synthesis in a way that brings something new into existence that didn't exist before. This is what the mind does. This is what the human role is. It's a bit like, in fact, it's entirely like Jung's transcendent function, if you've come across this. This is Hegel's dialectic. This is the Buddhist middle way. This is Heraclitus's enantiodromia of things becoming their opposites, except it's also about the blending of those two. This is temperance of the tarot. A fundamental human task. And so not only is this something you're doing all the time, if you're doing your job as a human well, this is also something you can do in a dedicated way through exercises. So active imagination is the Jungian technique for devoting yourself in that moment to engaging in a conversation with yourself. So to that end, I have a course out called How to Talk to Yourself, which is part of the Know Yourself program from Make It Conscious. So if you're interested to learn more about that, you can check that out. I'll make sure I put a link in the description for that. But everything I talk about on this channel is about a dialectical engagement. So really important point, this one. And that also means that you're engaging in situations with no predetermined outcome. You don't know what the outcome's going to be. This third thing that emerges, it's like chemistry, right? It's like when you mix sodium and chlorine, you get salt. What's that about? It's not about balance. It's not about compromise. It's not about meeting in the middle. It's about producing something new. And you cannot do that simply by machinating what already exists. It's not a calculation, it's a synthesis. And that happens through enduring tension and suffering the opposites. And that is only something that a mind can do, not a computer. That gives way, of course, to the next point, which is genuine creativity. There's different kinds of creativity. There is a kind of creativity in this machination of what already exists. That's a large part of it. But a more fundamental part is the genuine insights that come from intuition. And this, again, is an engagement with the unconscious mind, the implicit, that transcends tradition, analysis, and processing done by machines. And that is where all new things ultimately come from. And largely, of course, all of this is contingent on value judgments, ethical judgment as well. What does it mean to be ethical? Well, it's a big topic. I have talked about this in previous episodes. Check out the Mapping the Shadow series if you want to hear a longer discussion on that. It comes down to contradiction. Moving towards greater moral standard involves ironing out contradiction. And so a human can understand that, and it can make such judgments. It can self-determine moral judgments as well. Again, computer can't do that. So it can consider things, it can consider options, it can help you sort of talk to yourself about it maybe. If you have a conversation with it and try and weigh things up, it's very good for summarizing what it hears from you. It can summarize your own perspective and reflect it back to you, and that can be pretty useful. But ultimately, it's still you that decides whether it's a decision you're making for yourself or at work. So this is wisdom. This is something that a computer simply cannot do, not at an essential level. And tied to that as well, of course, is contextual understanding. One reason it was, from what I understand, so hard to program robots is because they have to make judgments about the world around them. And this comes right back to the philosophy of Kant, right? But what is it we actually see? Is it things in themselves, or is it things as they appear to us? And so in order for a machine to recognize anything, you have to program it what to recognize. So immediately you're adding your own perspective into that, your own judgments into that, whether qualitative or quantitative. So there is no purely objective perspective that it's possible to program into a machine. Whichever way you cut it, it's ultimately a human that's telling a machine what to do. So the machines are behaving as a very useful and effective extension, but not self-determined in themselves. And that means not capable of establishing ethical judgments. So this is something that humans, that you're going to have to keep doing, that I'm going to have to keep doing, that organizations are going to have to keep doing. So what does this actually look like for the 10-year outlook? Well, clearly AI augmentation is a key part of this. That means AI handling AI tasks, humans focusing on human tasks, in theory, in principle, and hopefully. I wonder if we might see the first one-person, $1 billion company. That's going to happen at some point, maybe in the next 10 years, who knows? Maybe even in today's money. With the way inflation's going, it's looking ever closer. But I think the record right now, as I mentioned, is probably WhatsApp, which sold for $19 billion and had 55 people. But it'll be very interesting to see the first person to build a $1 billion valued company. Skills-based economy. So another key point here would be skills becoming more important relative to credentials or job titles, because there's so much you can hide in a job title. And often that's a reason people love them so much. It's a form of inflation. Makes them feel good, right? It's part of the persona shadow dynamic. But ultimately, it's just an idea. It's an idea to hang out with, potentially useful one. Doesn't mean anything absolutely. So what's going to matter more is not mere titles, but actual skills and credentials. And not merely the ability to navigate corporate process or embody organizational knowledge. Last time I worked for a large organization, it struck me how big a part of the role that was. Because I'd moved from a small company to a large company, and the culture shock was incredible. Even though I was, in principle, doing the same kind of role, what I found was that 80-90% of my time was just in navigating corporate process. And what was incredible to me at the time is that if you wanted to know the answer to a question, for example, it might have been, how many phone masts does our organization actually have? I worked for a phone company. Okay, simple question, right? You want to know the answer to that. So what do? Well, you go to some recent documentation and you find that it's 6 months out of date. So you ask your teammate, he says, I'll talk to this guy. So you call this guy in another department. He says, oh, I'm not sure about that. Let me ask my mate or my boss who knows the answer. And so this guy then messages you telling you what he thinks. But this introduced so many layers of reliability that sometimes it wasn't even known. Like, you could be told something, but it wouldn't be correct, or there'd be differences of opinion from different people. And this was rife in the organization I worked in. Like, deception, dishonesty contributed to this in a huge way. But part of it was also just the complexity, such that maybe someone knew the answer, but you, as the guy who wanted to know, had no way of knowing which answer was the correct one. Or at least not very efficiently, and often not very accurately. AI changes that. And at the time I thought, well, one great business venture would be to have a kind of organizational AI, like a piece of software that just acts as a central hub for the organization. Everything feeds into it and you can just chat with it. Well, pretty obvious idea. And I certainly wasn't the only one having that idea 11, 12 years ago. And that's now happening. The challenge, of course, was not only technological, but actually political. A lot of folks really didn't want that, because suddenly a 9,000 person organization with 90% of their time being spent on organizational navigation and organizational knowledge strips down to 1,000 people. I think that sounds great because it means that humans no longer have to do machine tasks. But to a lot of folks, that sounds terrifying. And admittedly, there is a real dark side to that, because it opens up the risk of a concentration of power. It also opens up the risk of using technology as a form of control. So in the interests of freedom, that's going to become more and more of an issue here too. Maybe that should have been an extra point on this slide here, is that how to ensure privacy as this unfolds. Because right now, most usable AIs are linked to private companies. When is that going to change? When are we going to have blockchain-based AI, for example, or secure AI, where no one else can read your conversations, no matter how much they might want to, no matter if the government asks the creative AIs that hand the information over, they simply can't do it. Like, when's that going to start happening? That's going to be really important, because that creates a massive security risk otherwise, not to mention privacy violations. So next one then, flexible work standards. As I said last episode, a long-term running trend, but the thing is, the current theme here is not so much about just remote working, as it maybe at one point seemed like it was going to become that way. Like, organizations just closing down their offices completely, everyone's now going to be home-based. No, what we're seeing now is more of a hybrid model, where you work some days in the office, some days at home, and there's a limited degree of flexibility there. So for now, at least, this doesn't really feel like a synthesis. This feels more like a compromise or a balance. And the thing with compromise and balance is very expensive and very inefficient. Do a bit of this and a bit of that and hope that everyone is more or less happy most of the time. It's not going to last. It's not going to work that way forever. But for now, at least, this seems to be the 10-year outlook for most corporate organizations, for most people in most organizations. But the other thing to mention here is that this really depends on your job role and your level of seniority, of course. Different job roles require different levels of contact time. You've got the issue of graduates and up-and-comers needing to be around senior members of staff, needing to be around mentors, needing guidance. But then you've got the problem of, well, those senior folks, if anyone, need to work even more flexibly. They're the ones who are out and about doing things. They're the ones who want to work from home. And yet they're the ones who need to mentor the next generation. So that's either going to create, again, great opportunity for companies that pull that off well, or a kind of demographic crisis for those that don't. Because those that don't meaningfully develop and look after their people are going to fall apart within a generation. But for those who want to work on a smaller scale or go solo, flexible work is here to stay, working from anywhere, traveling the world, working online, working entirely remotely. This just creates immense freedom. And one of the greatest things you can do, if you're stuck in a Western country right now, your tax is going up 40%, 50%, your government has frozen tax thresholds for the next however many years, and simultaneously is inflating the money supply, trying to trap you in a sort of double bind whereby your cost of living is going up, and at the same time, your salary is being inflated away and your tax is going up. Sometimes the best single thing you can do is to just get out of there. It's like any relationship. If you learn that the person you're involved with is actually not in any way acting in your interests and just seeing you as a resource to be exploited, then in the interest of freedom, you better get out before the wheels fall off. So it's often hard to define that, and that's why I talk about evil and what it really consists of. You know, check out the recent essay on that if you want to go deeper. No one can decide for you if that's the right thing to do. But just like if it was with a partner or an employer or with a government, at some point you've got to make a decision that's right for you, because are they doing that? And if they're not doing that, then you'd be contradicting yourself to pretend that they were and to stick around. There might be some kind of compromise, something you can do without having to necessarily leave your home country, but the opportunity to do that is massive for those that are willing and able. So the idea of the purpose economy as well, doing things that actually fulfill you, this is just a natural consequence of all of this, of seeing the contradictions of the old ways of working that work so well for so long, a good couple of 100 years, right, since the main developments of the Industrial Revolution, and 55 years since the inception of the information age. All of these things served a purpose, all of these things created immense value, but like anything, they're also creating their own downsides and contradictions, and are forcing people to question, what does it actually mean for me to be working? What is work really about? That's what this whole series is about. But one caution here is that a lot of organizations are still seeing these symptoms and trends and still regarding them as something merely to be wrangled with and managed, rather than the product of something deeper, the product of a psychological shift. So it always makes me wince a bit when I hear employers talking about employee engagement or like measuring meaningful work in some way. This doesn't really make sense, because the idea should be that these are byproducts and benefits of doing things well, of honoring that freedom both ways, honoring your people and allowing them to honor you by return. That's what engagement is. It's not something you try to cultivate or create, because as long as you're doing that, you're still seeing the human as a resource rather than just a human. So treat them as a human and you'll find engagement just naturally rises. And that also means that if the role's not right for them, then it's best for everyone that they move on. It may be painful in the short term, but that's what shadow work is about. So I think that organizational shadow work is going to become more and more of a talking point as time goes on. And this means making difficult decisions, even when they are in everyone's best interests. But it also means reaching new heights of alignment between people and organizations. So no longer seeing things like trust and engagement and time logged in, all this stuff. These are byproducts. They're not the ends in themselves. And the best thing an organization can do is to stop getting so obsessed around the metrics. Of course, things have to be measured, but never lose sight of what it really is under the hood that generates those outcomes. That's why the last bullet point here is meaningful development, genuine self-knowledge, and human organization alignment. So upscaling means, yes, continuing to equip, to train and adapt, but it also should mean transformation, facilitating genuine inner work. How about that? One of my clients has just been accepted for a role with a large organization heading up a mindfulness initiative. So very exciting. And it's nice to hear organizations thinking more and more in this way. It's been happening for a while, sure. And mindfulness is a bit of a buzzword, and it's derived from an Eastern tradition. But it would be great to hear them talking more about organizational shadow work going forward as well, which involves voluntary suffering, facing truth, and greater alignment for the employee with themselves, and ultimately greater productivity, but as a byproduct, not as an end in itself. So I'm going to end with just summarizing a key distinction that we'd all do well to bear in mind going forward here. And that is whether we use machines and AI to do machine tasks or to imitate human tasks. It's not always so cut and dry. So sometimes you can apply AI to do a little bit of both. It's kind of machinating something, but it's also kind of trying to replace you to an extent. But the best use of technology will be that which doesn't imitate human beings at all. As Jacob Morgan makes the point, perhaps it's humans that have been imitating machines for so long. Perhaps what we're seeing now is not a replacement of humans by machines, but actually handing the human work back to the humans it should have always belonged with. Now, there's a reason it went through that process. There's a reason we had to do all these tasks that machines are now replacing humans with. But ultimately, it's creating this space where humans can actually be more human. So when you use tech, whether for yourself, your business, your employer, if you run an organization, be very conscious of this distinction. Are you using machine to do a machine task or merely to imitate a human task? Imitation may appear to serve you well and for a time, and that's what might make it so enticing. And some of the attempts at this that you see all over YouTube and social media and around all kinds of marketing material, some of it is just so pappy and unconvincing, and you think, how did the person behind this ever believe this was going to be effective in any way? But at least they've exposed themselves and their intentions in doing so. Be very aware of that, and bear in mind that humans are a lot smarter than many organizations give them credit for. And you might fool someone in the short term or one time, but it won't last forever. So it's an uphill battle trying to imitate a human task with a machine. So again, just to summarize those AI tasks, things like processing information, automating workflows, executing complex tasks, research, summarizing things. Human tasks involve leadership, creativity, self-determination, creating the future, having and building relationships, developing self-knowledge, shadow work, contributing unique and specific value, engaging in a dialectic, genuine creativity, not just machination, and understanding and making ethical judgments. So, thank you, and I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to learn more and get involved in some self-study, check out the Know Yourself program. There's 5 courses there. There's the Make It Conscious Philosophy course, which is priced very low at just $7. Then you've got the Active Imagination course, 2 shadow work courses, and the 7 Habits course as well. So I'll thank you for your time and attention, and look forward to seeing you in the next episode.